Let me guess. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome in the Karlspreis-Forum. And Mario, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to give you a speech. I think thank you very much for this extraordinary honor that I am receiving today, and I'll receive it tomorrow. I want to thank Armin Laschet. I want to thank the Lord Mayor of the city of Aachen and all of you. I think it's a delicate, we will discuss this in the brief conversation we are going to have, but I think it's present to all of us that we now live in a very, very delicate juncture, to say the least. And so we should, my message is that we should look at this moment of deep change and deep change in everything we're used to know, the change in the world we're used to grow, not with fear, but with courage. And not thinking that it's a crisis, but I think it's an opportunity. And we'll develop this in the conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
It's an honor, it's a privilege, a pleasure to welcome you to the European Charlemagne Prize Forum. Let's get right to the point. How did you become a deeply committed European? What is your underlying motivation?
Well, it's I have to go back for many years. There is someone in this room, my predecessor as president of the European Central Bank, Jean-Claude Trichet, who actually met me the first time was about 35 years ago. And at that time, I had spent most of the previous 15, I would say 20 years almost in the United States. I got there my doctorate, and then I was working. I was also teaching in Europe, but I was also spending a lot of time there. And frankly, and then I was called to head the Treasury Department in Italy. And in that role, I was the head delegation of Italy for the negotiations of the Maastricht Treaty. And Jean-Claude Trichet, even at that time, he was chairing everybody and make sure that you would all march in good order. And so he was the chairman of this committee we were used to meet. At that time, I frankly was not thinking much about that we should all go together. I was looking at what had happened in Europe very much with eyes of someone who had grown elsewhere. And it was an interesting experiment. I was not entirely convinced by many things. And then gradually, through the years, I appreciated the strength of our bond. I appreciated what we can achieve as first of all, as countries, as individuals, and as a continent, if we are united, if we work together. And the euro, by the way, which I was recalling a moment ago, is an exceptionally successful example of what I'm saying. We were divided. You may not remember, but certainly Jean-Claude and I, and very few people, I think you are of our age, could remember what was monetary policy before and how were the 80s and the 70s were years of inflation, were years of great disorder, confusion. And we speak a lot about tariffs now, but actually in the 70s, tariffs were even higher than they are today. Not only across the Atlantic, but also between us, we had lots of barriers of different kind. So that gradually was removed and it grew up through time. And the other reason that made me a very convinced European is that if I look at ourselves tonight, or more generally to Europeans, we agree on certain fundamental things. Right after the war, these things were peace. They were determined to keep peace, democracy, freedom. But through the years, we also share the same feelings about the fight now to climate change, about the protection of human rights, about the protection of minorities, about the respect of the rule of law. All these things are not really disagreed by anybody in Europe. We had forgotten that. We took all these things for granted. Now we are discovering that they're not granted, that there are lots of parts in this world where people will not agree with some of these things. So we do feel the need to protect them.
So after your American years, after your years in the United States, in a way you rediscovered Europe.
No, I think, yes, after being in the United States, I found Europe really. And that was certainly, that was the bottom line of what I said, yes.
There is a great Italian tradition of Europeans.
Yes.
De Gasperi, Spinelli, Colombo, Prodi, Draghi. The treaty is the Treaty of Rome. The decisive conference was the Conference of Messina, and the decision was taken in Taormina. Has Italy been something like the soul of Europe, maybe since the Romans?
Yeah, well, it was not only, they were not only the ones who were European. You had a great European in Konrad Adenauer. And as a matter of fact, both Alcide de Gasperi and Konrad Adenauer were two pillars of the newly created European Union. And both of them had something, in a sense, that I see today. For both of them, there was no alternative other than Europe if they wanted to preserve peace in this continent. You see, they were coming from a past where actually countries tried to dominate the others, and whenever we did, we had war. Our continent was defined by war. So again, we take this for granted, but think about that. For centuries, we were the place defined by wars. And these two men and others in France, in Belgium, understood what in my view is fundamental today too, is the inevitability of a solution. And today we have the same feeling, because if we want to make the changes that make us strong and protect our values, we have inevitably to do certain things. First of all, act together. Move upward, overcome the national dimension. For many of the things, there is no way we can do them at nation state level. We only can do that, take anything, take technology, take defense. Even research today is the same. It's just you need concentrations that go beyond national borders, innovation. And so the scale of the changes is now, and it's a relatively recent phenomenon. It's a phenomenon of the last 6, 7, 10 years, really. So we are discovering how inevitable is to overcome the national borders for many things.
When Alcide de Gasperi was awarded with the Charlemagne Prize in 1952, Armin Laschet told me a few minutes ago, he said we should have a common currency. That was 1952. Europe is a success story, but a story of slow success.
True. But you think, how long has it taken to build the nation states? Italy and Germany were the most recent examples. How many centuries did that take? In comparison, we are really moving through seconds, really, here. So I think we've got to be realistic. The amount of change, the more we move forward, the bigger is, in a sense, the change we need to undertake. And to get people convinced of changing their frames of mind, some of their institutions, because it's unavoidable, takes time. But I think all in all, what we did in the last 2-3 years, we did the first step. The first step was to become aware of our needs, vulnerabilities, fragilities, and weaknesses. Before, we were convinced that by and large we are okay. We were not okay. And to close this on a positive note, by the way, the private sector is actually integrating very fast. In the last 5-6 years, we had in many sectors, from technology, AI, defense, and others, and really a significant number of joint ventures, partnerships, mergers and acquisitions. So it's moving forward.
I take another example from the collapse of Bretton Woods.
The collapse
of Bretton Woods system.
Yep.
To the creation of the European Monetary Union, it took 2 decades.
Yep.
So do we have to be patient too? Do we have the time now?
Well, the euro didn't really respond to the same needs as the Bretton Woods system. So by the way, you reminded of a time which looks eerily similar to the time we're living today. We had the 70s, which started with an energy crisis, with inflation, with a dysfunctional American democracy episode, the Watergate, and so on. And frankly, those 10 years were not great. There were years of, in Italy especially, we had terrorism and other things. But basically, we learned the lesson. We are not making the same mistakes as our policymakers made at that time. So that is something that we have to remember, looking with optimism to the future. But your question was, should we be patient beyond any imagination? Well, I'll turn around the question saying, should a decision-making system be immutable no matter what happens to the rest of the world? And the answer is no. It's impossible. The rest of the world in the last 6-7 years has changed completely and is asking for much greater speed of decision. And we got to change that.
And how can the decision-making process be improved in the EU?
Well, that, depends. There are many actors there. We have the European Commission, you have the European Parliament, you have national governments. So it's a process but I think what is important now is that everybody basically is going through the same conversation that we are having today. Everybody is convinced of the need. The very fact that you are asking me this shows I would say, profound dissatisfaction with the present situation. And I think this, in any kind of decision, that's the very first step, and it's often the most difficult one. So I think it can be changed. I think, if we should have the strength and the intelligence to see how we can change it. And this is true for European Commission, for European Parliament, and for governments. Now, they are different institutions and they are different timing, in a sense. The timing of government's decision is also dictated mostly by the internal political situation. And certainly the stronger is a government, the faster certain decisions can be taken. So there it's normal in a democracy, we have to follow what the internal political situation is suggesting. But what is encouraging is that even governments that were, let me be kind, uninterested in doing much at the European Union level now seem to be willing to do much more.
Minister Katharina Reiche said a few minutes ago in her speech that the Draghi report was the most important document in recent years. And this report has a strong impact. Everyone welcomes it. But what is the political path to implementing the proposals?
Oh, the political path is you have many layers. You have regulation that can be done, can be implemented in a much quicker way than other things. And it can be implemented at European Commission level, at European Parliament level, and nation states governments. The most urgent things, in a sense, is, well, there are two or three most urgent things, and they can go in parallel. First is complete the capital market union. That is the fastest, the simplest thing to do. Just there is no reason today, when you can trade bonds, shares, everything from oil to gold through platforms, there is no sense in having a fragmented capital market. It's not fragmented any longer in substance. So if we keep it fragmented, what we are actually doing, we are financing rents of companies, of people who actually basically benefit from this fragmentation. So there is no gain to keep it. And it's, frankly say, I think that people who've worked many years, 20 years on that will probably resent my remark. It's now become pretty easy to do. We should do it. The second thing is to complete the single market. What is, we still have lots of barriers. By the way, we first did the big step. In 1986, we created the single market for goods. So by and large, you pay a toothpaste the same everywhere in the European Union. We didn't do it for services. Now, it so happens that services today are 80% of GDP in the European Union. And services are things that are becoming essential, like digitalization, like AI, like much of the innovation. So we have to overcome what is actually fragmenting the market for digitalization, AI. And that is something that, the sense of direction is clear. Why it's not easy? Because there are often, or almost always, big vested interests that hamper this process. And this is even more true in the third thing that we should do, which is energy. I think perhaps the most urgent thing is to have a market for European energy, more specifically electricity, which is fully integrated, but especially brings down the electricity prices. We cannot go on with these prices and expect to grow and decarbonize at the same time. So it's, and frankly, what the experience we are showing is that even if we were, I would never do that, but even if we were to backtrack to fossil fuels in a way that we used to, we would be even more dependent on outside forces that are not under our control. So this is fast if we redesign the electricity market. not big changes are necessary, but you certainly clash with very powerful vested interests that incidentally we have helped to create, because the design that we have today was appropriate 15 years ago, 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, when the renewables were still a small portion of the overall energy mix. Today it's changed. Today renewables have become a very sizable portion. So anyway, I don't want to get too technical today.
Implementing the proposals, who are your allies?
Well, I'm not responsible for implementing the proposal, so I'm happy with that. But I think to say, I mean, as you said before, the report was vastly welcome. So even nowadays, everybody says we should do this, we should do that. Frankly, you notice that people do things when they benefit from doing this and they see the benefit. And that's what the private sector is doing. Somehow, at the public sector level, you have a political process that you have to be observant with, and that takes more time. And I think, I don't know how to read the recent example. There was the European Commission come out 2 months ago suggesting that the deadline for the single market completion should be, I think, the 28th or 27, I don't remember. Well, then this proposal goes in front of the committees, and the reaction was, oh, no, this European Commission date is too close. We have to postpone by 1 or 2 years. You see? They're not my allies.
When you speak about vested interests, to be concrete, the highest gap is between France and Germany.
What the
gap of invested interest?
It's a real... No, I was not thinking about that, but certainly the electricity connection is one problem. I mean, you can't pay the same megawatt per hour, 850 euros in Germany and 130 in France at the same time of the day, the same month, the same year. That is not an integrated electricity market. It's a very fragmented one. And that's only one example. We cannot afford throwing out, wasting, or as they say, curtailing 15% of the energy produced by the renewables because we don't have grids. That's again, it's another example. But then as you go across industries, you find hundreds of these examples where there is no action, but because inaction protects incumbents' interests.
Could Europe of defense be a booster for competition, for a competitive Europe?
Defense has been the really first sector of a response. And the response, especially in Germany, has been very, very significant. It's now, is it by itself a boost for competitiveness? It is true to the extent that that huge expenditure goes also into what's called R&D. At that point, you have a big boost and you have spillovers to many other sectors. That's what's happened in the United States. That's what's happened everywhere, really, in China too. And that's what should happen in Europe as well. And that's what's happening actually, I don't know exactly about Germany, but certainly in the United Kingdom and in France to some extent. So it's that is the way. At the same time, we have pressures from outside. So we got to navigate between what is needed immediately and what we should do with an eye to the long term.
We are in conflict with China, with Russia, and more with the United States. Are we isolated in Europe?
Well, I don't know about isolated. We're certainly lonely. We are alone now. We were not that alone 2 years ago. And
what does it mean?
Well, I'll tell you what it means. Europe prospered on a construction that would see free trade outside, and then it wouldn't matter from which country you buy or sell things to or from. Now, so you actually end up choosing the best on efficiency grounds, as the economists would say. You're basically where it's most convenient, you sell the things or you buy things where it's most convenient. Now the world has changed. That world was based on a unipolar presence of the United States as a guarantor of security, and especially in this context, guarantor of those multilateral rules which had governed trade. Now this is gone. It's not multipolar. It's not unipolar any longer. It's multipolar, and this defense of the rules that, in a sense, were almost written by the United States, certainly sponsored and enforced by a multilateral organization strongly supported by the United States, are gone. So now, when we exchange things, when we buy and sell things, we have to ask ourselves, does it make any difference for our vulnerabilities, our dependency from abroad? Whom are we selling to? Whom are we especially buying from? We've discovered, for example, that to depend on energy, on gas imports, natural gas imports from Russia, was not a great idea all in all, especially having up to 60% of all our imports coming from there. Now, do we want to recreate the same dependency in other parts of the world? And so on. So you see that now the choices where to sell, what to buy, often depend on security. And security comes first, often. In other words, you want to be sure that your supply chain continues to receive key inputs from abroad, or as we say, is resilient. Now, that if the choices depend on security, it so happens they are not often the most efficient, the most convenient. In a sense, they cost more now, which means a world where probably inflation is going to be higher structurally. And that is one consequence. But the second consequence for us is very important, because we prospered on free trade. And this free trade is no longer here any longer. So we have to react to that. We have to reduce the dependencies. But how do we do that? Are we going to be protectionist? Well, so far, our continent has been, in a sense, the least protectionist of all the other parts of the world in our reactions. And I think that all in all, it was the wise choice, even though we were sort of being looked as subservient to others often, no? Now, what we have to do now to gain independence is to boost our internal market, to become stronger inside. And by the way, this is the unavoidable way if we want to develop technologies in innovative sectors. We have to guarantee to these producers a stability of internal demand that does not depend on the vagaries of people abroad, but is actually stable internally. And this is a big change for us, because we were basically taking for granted that external demand was a big supporter of Europe. Now that is not there any longer. So we got back to invest a lot in Europe now.
Europe is steadfastly supporting Ukraine. Europe is currently funding all military aid. Europe has not allowed itself to be divided, and according to the Eurobarometer, 74% of Europeans support European integration, the highest percentage ever. Isn't this a time when Europe is forging a new European identity more strongly than ever?
I think so. I think in a sense that was what I was saying at the beginning. The fact that we are rediscovering values that we had taken for granted for many years, like peace, democracy, freedom, but also solidarity. I mean, think about what it means to have a continent where you have public education of high quality, by the way, and we have public health assured to all citizens. It makes a big difference. So we have, and then we have the fight to climate change, and then we have the protection of human rights and of minorities and so on. All this makes us pretty similar, and the rediscovery makes us willing to go ahead and forge this identity, as you were saying a moment ago.
There is a window of opportunity now.
Is what?
A window of opportunity.
I think so. I think so. It's a great window of opportunity.
In the report, you advocate for a pragmatic form of federalism. What is pragmatic and what is not?
Well, it's the idea is that now we are there. We are moving there. We have an increasing perception that if we do things together, we achieve great progress. And we have to continue on that road. And at the same time, we should be pragmatic in the sense that not everything will work the very first time. Things may take time. But what is important is we should never lose sight of the ultimate goal.
Should Europe become a political federation?
I think you get to the end game, because that's about what you are saying is the arrival point. You get to that if people discover that acting together is successful. Because ultimately, there is no better recipe to unity than success. And by the way, in recent times, we've shown greater unity, much greater unity in the last 2 years. Think about all the attacks we received. And by and large, we basically were pretty united on that. So it's coming through more than through, you see, that's what's changed. More the unity, the movement on this path, it's coming more from facts, more from concrete actions than programs, declarations. I think that's very positive because it's realistic. We're not asking people for impossible things, especially if you don't show that these impossible things become things that can benefit people.
So in an indirect way, Donald Trump is a great European.
No, I wouldn't go that far. Because I wouldn't go that far for a substantive reason. On one hand, yes, because it's really shortening the time that we have in order to make things that are essential for us. On top of that, attacking us, it's sort of strengthening our sense of unity. But I wouldn't go that far as saying he's a great European, because at the same time he's feeding into all the political movements in Europe that are against this path. So I think it's an opportunity, not only a danger, not only a moment of danger, but that's it. not more than that.
The United States of Europe, is this utopia or a vision?
Well, it's much less of an utopia today than it would have been 10 years ago.
And the last question, Mr. Draghi, what did you learn in your years at the ECB?
What did I learn at the ECB?
About Europe.
About Europe.
About the mentalities, about the differences, about the cohesion.
Well, I learned that basically the ECB was built on the great tradition of the Bundesbank. And so once you had to decide about monetary policy there, first of all, you decide on a collegial basis. It's not that you take these decisions by yourself. Second, if there is a crisis, as we had, we have decided, and the famous words were followed by something that is often forgotten. Whatever it takes within our mandate. That's you learned the discipline and the importance of the legitimacy of having a mandate that's been democratically accepted by all the citizens of Europe. That's the real strength of Europe.
And a very last question.
Thank you. One more question.
But not very serious.
Yeah.
What is your advice to your new colleague Walsh with 3.8% inflation in the United States?
Well, I would advise that I wouldn't bet too much on the increase in productivity coming from AI tomorrow. So I'd rather face inflation now. That's what I would advise.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's it.